The story you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts featuring historical characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Fish's father was 75 years old when Fish was born and died shortly after. He was the youngest of 4 children born to Randall and Ellen Fish, and his full name was Hamilton Howard Fish. His mother wasn't able to take care of Fish or his siblings, so Fish ended up at St. John's Orphanage in Washington, where he regularly suffered abuse. Caretakers often beat the children there, and they would even encourage the children to hurt each other. Fish's family had a long history of mental illness. The list went from uncles to brothers to sisters to his own mother. Fish's mother suffered regular visual hallucinations. Unlike most children, Fish grew to enjoy these beatings. It was while he was at the orphanage that he started preferring to be called Albert, the name of a deceased sibling, because the children had nicknamed him Ham and Eggs. Fish later claimed that he not only experienced but witnessed terrible whippings at the orphanage and saw things being done by young boys that they shouldn't have been doing. His mother Ellen gained employment with the government in 1880 and was able to retrieve Fish from the orphanage. 2 years later, at the age of 12, Fish entered into a relationship with a telegraph boy. This boy allegedly introduced Fish to bizarre and perverted practices, such as eating feces and drinking urine. Fish started to visit the public baths so he could watch boys undress, and he would spend most of his spare time and weekends there. Throughout his adulthood, Fish would write obscene letters to women he found advertising in matrimonial agencies and classified columns in papers and magazines. This fondness for shocking with the written word would take an even darker turn when his behavior truly entered into the realm of depravity. When his mother eventually took him back, he even administered self-afflicted beatings in his spare time, soon developing a psychosexual fixation on the correlation between pleasure and pain. Fish became a bona fide masochist. Fish's sexual preferences were deviant to say the least, and soon devolved into extreme BDSM gone wrong. He became curious about what inflicting unwanted pain on others would be like. In 1910, Fish began a sadomasochistic relationship with a house painter named Thomas Kedden. 10 days into their relationship, Fish locked Kedden into an abandoned farmhouse. He tortured Kedden and even cut off half of Kedden's penis. Then just like that, Fish decided he'd had enough for the day. Fish wrapped Kedden's penis in a Vaseline-lined handkerchief, tossed him a $10 bill for his trouble, and kissed him goodbye. Some say this is when Fish's homicidal urges began to emerge. Despite his deviant habits and growing signs of mental disturbance, Fish did marry. He had 6 kids with a woman who later left him for a boarder of theirs once Fish became unable to conceal his mental illness. Fish had regular auditory hallucinations, and his children noticed his odd ways. Luckily, they claimed that the worst Fish ever did to them was teach them mildly sadomasochistic games. Other children were not so lucky. Fish started to become preoccupied with the idea of cannibalism. Like many budding cannibals, he began by eating raw meat. When that wasn't enough, he began abducting young children whom he would abuse, then consume. Edward Budd was an 18-year-old boy looking for farm work. Fish spotted this in an advertisement and decided to pay the family a visit. He planned to mutilate and kill Edward after luring him to do non-existent farm work. As Fish set up his trap though, he spotted Edward's 10-year-old sister. It turned out Grace would be much more suited to his evil appetite. Grace Budd, he would eat. Fish had visited the Budd household under the false name of Frank Howard. He told Grace's parents that he was planning on going to his niece's birthday party and was wondering if dear Grace would like to join him. Her poor parents consented, not knowing that watching Grace walk in hand with Fish was the last time they would ever see her. He took the girl to an empty house, and while she was outside picking flowers, Fish had gone inside and removed his clothing because he didn't want to get blood on them. He called out to Grace and hid in a closet until she came into the room. When Grace saw Fish naked, she began to cry and told Fish she would tell her mother. She tried to run, but he strangled her to death, then cut her body into small pieces so he could carry it back to his home and eat it. Even though Fish's victim of choice was actually young boys, it would be this little girl who would lead to his capture. Police investigated Grace's disappearance for 6 years before they found a lead. They would never guess the lead would come from Fish himself. Fish sent a gruesome letter to Grace's mother detailing the events of her death. After he was arrested, his other murders were uncovered. 8-year-old Francis McDonald was reported missing on July 14, 1924. Earlier that day, he was playing on the porch with his mother when a gray-haired, frail old man walked down the street muttering to himself. The mother noticed his awkward demeanor but did not report anything. Later that day, while Francis was playing at the park, his friends noticed that he walked into the woods with an elderly gray-haired man. When his family noticed that he was missing, they organized a search. The following day, his body was found hanging from a tree in the woods near his home. MacDonald had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. An autopsy revealed he had received several lacerations to his abdomen and legs. On February 11, 1927, Billy Gaffney, a 4-year-old playing with his neighbor, who was also named Billy, disappeared, and the 3-year-old Billy stated that the Boogey Man took Billy Gaffney. Fish had taken him to a house on Riker Avenue, gagged him, tied him up, and removed his clothes. His clothing was burnt and his shoes tossed into the dump. Fish went home, and the next day he came back with tools. Gaffney was still alive, and Fish whipped him with a cat of 9 tails until blood was running down his legs. He cut his mouth from ear to ear and cut off his nose and ears. By the time his eyes were gouged out, the boy was dead. Fish stuck a knife in his belly and drank the blood. Like Grace Budd, Gaffney's body was cut up into small pieces, and those Fish wanted to eat were taken home, and the others placed in sacks and weighed down before going into the river. Fish sent a letter to Grace Budd's mother in November 1934, which detailed the little girl's death and how Fish cannibalized her body. On the envelope was an emblem, NYPCBA, which stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. When police investigated, a company janitor said he had taken some of the stationery home to use, but had left it behind when he moved out of a rooming house. Further inquiries discovered Fish had checked out that same room just a few days before the letter was sent. According to the landlady, Fish was expecting a check to come from his son and asked her to hold it for him. So the chief investigator waited outside the room until Fish came back. He asked Fish to come to the station with him for questioning, and at first Fish agreed. But then he pulled out a razor blade, which the investigator was able to disarm from him quickly. When they arrived at the station, Fish didn't deny he had murdered Grace Budd. He told the investigator that he had originally planned to kill her brother Edward. His trial was set to begin on March 11, 1935 in New York. Fish pleaded insanity, saying God had told him to kill children. He was examined by several psychiatrists who testified that Fish had many sexual fetishes. When one psychiatrist was asked if Fish was insane and if he knew right from wrong, his response was that Fish was insane, and though he knew what he had done was wrong, his thoughts were overrun by his opinions of religion, sin, and atonement. Fish had claimed that by killing a child, He was atoning for his sins. Albert Fish had many run-ins with police in his lifetime. However, each time, charges were dismissed. He discussed the details of the murder of Billy Gaffney, describing how he tied him up and beat him. He even admitted to drinking his blood and making a stew out of his body parts. His attitude was not like those of people with psychosis. He was calm and reserved, which was out of the ordinary. He confessed that he wanted to inflict pain and have pain inflicted on him. He taunted and preyed on children, mostly boys. He also had a compulsion to write and send obscene letters. An X-ray determined that he placed needles into the region between his anus and scrotum, and at least 29 needles were discovered. Although the members of the jury believed Fish was insane, they felt he should be executed anyway, so they declared him sane and found him guilty of the murder. He was therefore convicted and sentenced to death. On January 16, 1936, Fish was strapped into the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. The execution began at 11:06 p.m. and he was declared dead just 3 minutes later. Like many other executed prisoners, Fish was buried in the prison cemetery. Reportedly, Fish even assisted the executioner with putting the electrodes in place on his body. The last words he spoke were apparently, "I don't even know why I'm here." Immediately after his execution, his lawyer James Dempsey told the awaiting press that he had Fish's final statement, but he would never show it to anyone because it was the filthiest string of obscenities that I have ever read. Thank you for taking the time to comment on my past 2 uploads. Miss Aubrey Delgado, Eriza Miguel, Tiktilaok Stories, Unicorn Blood V2, Poor Inkay, Ben Jose, Ms. Colette, Tess Atienza, and Mischievous Being. Thank you to the following people who took the time and joined me in my premieres. I appreciate you all. Eriza Miguel, Junden Rosales, Sandatang Pinoy Horror Stories, Miss Cafe Latte, Eliseo Saavedra, Ben Jose, Poor Inkay, Pinoy Shocking Stories, at Tess Atienza. Maraming salamat po. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!